Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberger channel, the strange music show that will, just dive into a different album each and every week, regardless of what it is, essentially. So today introduces an artist that I probably should have discussed in this show before, as well as, also returning to a label that I've actually wanted to cover again for quite some time. It's been a long time, but the last time we visited the label Molt Fluid, we covered Espelluite by Arena Toti and Diurnal Burdens. The strange collaborative album that was a wonderfully gorgeous, confusing experience. In today's episode, we are of course returning to Molt Fluid, and we're actually getting a bit of another similar experience, though this time in a solo context. One of the strangest, most bewildering albums I think I've come across, but one that I actually found to be incredibly fun each and every time I've listened to it since, reviewing it for this episode. Very excited to discuss this one, so today I present La Miel De Los Cráteres by Bardo Todol y Aves Nido. Enjoy. So, of course, who is Bardo Todol y Aves Nido? Well, Bardo Todol is the moniker for one Pablo Pico, Argentinian field recordist, musician and composer, born 11th of October 1982. So under this moniker, Pico pushes out some very strange sound explorations, drawing on the use of field recordings to create very odd sound experiences combined with other bits and bobs here and there. And so today we're reviewing La Miel De Los Cráteres, Pico's album release on Michael Funderwick's Molt Fluid and its 15th official release, printed with its customary thermal print that will fade over time. And so for this album, Bandcamp tells us the following. La Miel de los Cráteres means the lunar crater's honey in Spanish. Recorded with tape recorders, luneta synth, clarinet, bells, and a lot of wet sounds in Stylistic, Argentina in 2024, keeping fresh the tape jazz on and on and on. So a lot of context for the strange experience of this very album, as well as some esoteric statements towards the end, right? But what more should we expect? It's essentially a bewildering release here. At slightly over 21 minutes in length, we essentially are getting what I would describe as an audio collage that traverses many little scenes across this rather lengthy runtime. Some parts are actually truly delightful, I have to say, while other bits are very strange and confusing, but they result in something that altogether is just really fascinating to experience. It's one that I really enjoyed experiencing when I sat down to review this one directly from the cassette itself. Essentially, just to briefly mention the story of why I decided to review this one, I was essentially catching the train to see Godspeed You Black Emperor live at Troxy on Friday up in London, whenever it was. And my phone battery was being so grumpy for the entire day. So I figured the best thing to do would be to bring my cassette player here and review something direct from this, basically, while I charge my phone on the train. Knowing that I wanted to return to the label of Molt Fluid, I went through them all and essentially grabbed this one out of my physical collection, not really remembering if I've actually heard this one or not, which is not a good thing. Like, I'll be honest, it rang a bell, but I couldn't quite remember much of this one. But I'm actually glad I grabbed this one, because it quickly has become one of my new favourites from Molt Fluid. An idiosyncratic audio collage of nonsensical sounds sourced from half the time God knows what, right? Bewildering and confusing and yet so oddly delightful, and something I had so much fun writing about, so yeah, let's dive into it, shall we? So obviously opening up with its title track, the very opener is just a very weird twang. And you wonder what happened at the very beginning, until you get bombarded with these sort of warbling assortments of instruments coming in briefly, caught in amongst peculiar effects of cassette effects, it feels. Stopping, starting, being rewound and slowed down, and basically just anything else you could do with cassettes, essentially. And then there's a lot of beeping electronics, and it creates such a weird, intangible experience where it feels like literal sounds sourced from something, before being offset by something completely made up and nonsensical. It's like it's all just teetering in place, going back and forth between these two different states, essentially, even throwing some odd abstraction in the form of what sounds like the clarinet. And as it's all occurring, it all just seems to be constantly changing up the scene, though, going back and forth between these tiny micro vignettes of, real places and imaginary places, caught in amongst a deluge of peculiarities that never once sits still, it feels. And with it all just fluttering past constantly, it becomes almost impossible to really catch the detail of anything as it's all occurring. Like, things are too brief in their form to even sound real for the most part, causing you to really question what had even occurred. It is an incredibly surreal composition, sure enough. One that leans upon so many different elements from time to time, to the tape recorders, the synths, to the strange little samples found all within it, essentially. And what I find so fun and delightful is the strange occurrences of something briefly tangible at various points. Be it the form of a voice briefly muttering away something, or the glide across a piano key, or the faintest sound of bird song. Like, it's all just constantly jumping from moment to moment, these small microcosms of strange, surreal world. One big smorgasbord all coming together in the form of this, rather large audio collage, essentially. Like, as bewildering as it is, I have to say there's something very neat about the entire thing. The elements themselves are so incredibly surreal. Like, you'll go for something almost pleasant sounding, be it the gentle form of an experimental ambience, before finding yourself in the throes of rather noisy delusions, essentially. It's a composition that it refuses to sit still, and instead just navigate its odd cacophony of scenes. And it's very bewildering, but I find it very fascinating, as you kind of wonder what is going to be occurring next the more this one is all progressing, essentially. Like, it's an album that is kind of playing on the expectations of what you try to expect in something that is so freeform and abstract, essentially. Like, it's so odd because you get those odd frequency deludes of electronics and noises, essentially, and then you'll get nice patches of clarinets at times. And then you'll enjoy those bits for moments, only to then be followed by more noisy, surreal electronic delusions of interference, essentially. And it just teeters back and forth between these moments, back and forth. And it's always navigating to other places the more this one's all occurring. Never once settling down, and instead just always jumping to the next thing. I find it all so delightfully bewildering. But it's exactly why I enjoy something like this, though. Like, Pico has gathered together such unusual sorts of sounds for the creation of this singular composition, combining surreal elements with the oddly tangible moments, and creating this incredible sonic collage in the process. Like, you're kind of getting these sort of, what sounds like cassette effects of, brief samples of, anything, essentially, offset by more natural instruments, and then other parts that are just more synth-led and electronics, essentially. I find when I listen to it, I'm enthralled by the ever-changing nature of the entire thing, but also very confused as well. And to me, it's actually very, very reminiscent of the likes of things that I've heard from the likes of Molt Fluid, as well as other labels such as Fault Records, for example. Things in the realms of Espiritualité by Arena Toti and Diana Burdens in particular, though. Probably because it's from the same label is why I was particularly reminded of that album out of all of them. These experimental electronic albums that play around with sounds so much, essentially, that you find it impossible to really know what's going on half the time. The warbling of electronics intertwined in a kaleidoscope of field recordings, resulting in something intangible yet brilliantly weird to experience at the same time. To try and talk about the composition again, though, there is one part where the whole thing tapers off, though, more towards the end of the whole thing. It's very interesting because it comes after that sort of collage effect, and it all just tapers off, leaving this bed of silence. And it occurs following such a clarity of nonsensical and inexplainable sounds. Like, when you're listening to it, you kind of feel like the whole thing might be coming to an end. Only for this gentle bed of ambient drones, faint warbles, and a murky layer of wet, whatever that was mentioned in the liner notes, I guess, occurring for an oddly pleasant amount of time, I have to say. And for me, it's one of the few tangible moments on this album, as it's following so much silence that, kind of like when we discussed Then Silent by Bernard Guntier, the silence makes the things that follow it have a bit more emphasis, essentially. And I think it sounds really nice as a result, though, like, even with the more surreal elements thrown into it all. But what's interesting is that it actually follows a bit of a jump scare with audio, like when it suddenly shifts to something different and altogether more unpleasant scene. Very brief when it occurs, and it's another thing of sort of like, did that even happen when it actually does show up on this recording? But what's even weirder is that what follows it is like this uncomfortable bed of just wet sounds. Like, I don't even know what's happening there, truth be told. But I find it remarkable, though, because it's, you know, it's a nice moment followed by such an odd one, and it kind of helps, cement the album's incredibly idiosyncratic nature, essentially, into this, oddly tangible and both intangible moments that are occurring on the album towards the end, essentially. Like, essentially, with the sudden change you've got here, it kind of reminds you of 2001's, monkey throwing the bones spaceship jump cut type thing. Like, something that is so sudden in a change, essentially. And I don't know how intentional it was by Pico to construct it that way, but it certainly feels like it. Such a strange play in the on the audience of making them think that the whole thing is over before, navigating itself right back towards the more surreal, abstract nature of combined sounds once more. Very inexplainable and very surreal, I have to say. Like, I have to say, it's kind of a hard album to actually summarise and put into words, essentially. Like, albums of this nature are inherently so strange and bewildering. And it's in that sense of bewilderment that I'm experiencing that I find my enjoyment of the music itself. The odd fact that it's making me so confused is essentially just a delight to me. And I'm never really been sure of why that's a thing for me personally. Like, why is that something I enjoy in music? I don't know. It's this, like, I can't really say for sure. Like, just to try to follow that a bit, it's the same way that I can't properly explain why my heart is tugged by certain songs and albums, like in that sort of sense of beauty that you get in the likes of Bing and Ruth, for example. Why am I thrown to, in a similar way, why am I also thrown towards things that naturally confuse me when I listen to it? I'm not sure, but I know that sense of confusion and bewilderment that I'm experiencing is something I'm enjoying. I think there's something really neat about it, even though it makes no sense. But I think it's just what albums like these do, essentially. They play around with sounds in such a free and delightful way, containing a multitude of different, hidden secrets in amongst the chaos of the compositions. And I love how it just straddles that line of surreal elements offset by the vaguest semblances of reality itself. Brief recordings capturing a place that you can almost recognise, while surreal elements just throw it all away into abstraction entirely, with the composition going back and forth between these two states constantly, it feels. It's probably because it's also idiosyncratic for the most part, just combining so many different elements across a fairly lengthy runtime, essentially, that it results in something so delightfully intangible. Like, I can't quite put my finger on it, truth be told, but I just find it oddly amazing and fun to experience. This constantly shifting experience that goes in so many different directions and then finding strange places along the way as a result, which you can choose to be dragged along to if you want to or not. Depends on how you're perceiving, I guess, which I guess is different to every single person whenever you're listening to anything experimental. For me, I find it enthralling for some reason. But yes, I definitely think this is an incredibly neat album indeed. So much of the music that's released from Molt Fluid tends to navigate many elements of surreality, often being noisy excursions into the discovery of sounds in all of its many facets. What I think is especially neat, though, is how much fun people are having in the process of making music like this. Now, as somebody who is dabbling in almost similar things, I would say, with the way in which is what I'm really trying to push forward with the BQPD moniker, I can really understand what's so fun about the process of just making weird audio recordings, essentially. Especially with that project, as I'm now essentially exploring my own library of sounds that I've been making for many, many years, close to a decade, essentially, but just taking all those sounds and seeing what you can make by combining it into weird ways, essentially. But more on those on another day, though, because we're discussing this album. But the reason why I've really brought this up is just that parallel I find from creating and making music in this particular way. Of just, making sounds, combining weird things together and seeing what occurs. And what I think is cool is that Pico is definitely having a lot of fun doing so. And it results in experiences that are so bewildering and enigmatic. And this is part of what makes it so brilliant to hear, I think. Like, it makes very little sense, but an abstract collage like this isn't going to make a lot of sense, I feel. And it's how you as a listener ends up perceiving it, I feel. For me, I think it's great, and I adore the entire thing, even though it makes no sense. And so yeah, before we get ahead of ourselves, I think it's probably best to just bring this one to an end. Time to finish our review on La Miel De Los Cráteres by Bardo Todol y Aves Nido. I'm really glad to have dived into this one in particular, though, as it was the exact kind of thing I was in the mood for to review when I sat down to review something, essentially. Like I said, I wanted to return to Molt Fluid at some point, and as mentioned, I ended up landing on this cassette to review almost randomly, I guess. But I'm glad to have done so, because it's allowed me to allowed us to introduce ourselves to Bardo Todol so nicely, I feel, as well as coming back to Molt Fluid, which is such a fascinatingly wonderful experimental label. Yes, a very strange enigmatic sound collage here, though. Definitely one of my favourites from Molt Fluid, I have to say. Truly brilliant stuff. And so with that, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. I do wish you all the best. Take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.